When Counter-Strike 2 was announced, players had one thing in mind: finally getting those long-awaited 128-tick servers. This was the dream, the one thing Valve could do to make matchmaking feel as smooth and competitive as third-party services like FACEIT. After all, the community had been begging for this for over a decade. Imagine how crazy it is that in 2025 the official servers still don't run on 128-tick. Instead, Valve came up with something entirely different: sub-tick. And as much as they tried to sell it as a revolutionary improvement, well, let's just say the reaction hasn't exactly been enthusiastic. For those who aren't familiar with how tick rates work, here's a quick breakdown. A tick is essentially a frame of information processed by the server. A 64-tick server updates the game 64 times per second, while a 128-tick server does this 128 times per second. The higher the tick rate, the smoother the gameplay feels, with actions like shooting, movement, and grenade throws being processed more precisely. Competitive players had good reason to believe that 128-tick servers would become the norm in CS2, given that other FPS titles have already made the switch. But Valve, in classic Valve fashion, decided to take an entirely different route. This is where the sub-tick system comes into play, a so-called innovation meant to eliminate the need for a fixed tick rate. The idea was that instead of relying on set intervals, the game would process inputs instantly, supposedly making gameplay more responsive. In theory, this should have been better than even 128-tick servers, ensuring every shot, movement, and grenade throw was registered with pinpoint accuracy. But in practice, the results have been far from what players expected. Instead of a revolutionary leap forward, sub-tick has introduced inconsistencies that have left the community frustrated, leading many to abandon CS2 altogether. One of the biggest complaints about sub-tick is that it's unpredictable. Players who were used to the precision of 128-tick servers on FACEIT and other platforms immediately noticed that their movements and shots felt off. Techniques like bunny hopping, jump throws, and quick scoping, which were second nature to high-level players, now felt unreliable. Valve promised a system that would adapt and calculate actions with extreme accuracy, but the reality is that the game often feels less responsive than before. And to make matters worse, Valve has been stubbornly defensive about their new system, insisting that it works perfectly, when the player base clearly disagrees. This whole situation begs the question: why didn't Valve just implement 128-tick servers like everyone wanted? The answer, as always, comes down to money and accessibility. Running 128-tick servers requires significantly more processing power and bandwidth, meaning higher costs for Valve. And let's not forget that not all players have high-end PCs and fast internet connections. While professional and high-level competitive players would benefit immensely from 128-tick, a large proportion of the casual player base might not even notice it. Valve, being a company that prioritizes keeping its massive player base intact, likely saw this as a risk they weren't willing to take. But there's another side to this. While Valve's reluctance to upgrade servers may seem like a purely financial decision, it also highlights a fundamental issue in modern gaming: developers making decisions they believe are best for the player base, even when the community is unanimously asking for something else. Sure, not every player understands the intricacies of game development, but when the overwhelming majority of the competitive scene agrees on a change, it might be worth listening. Instead, Valve has dug its heels in, insisting that sub-tick is the future, even as players leave in droves for third-party platforms that offer the one thing they always wanted: 128-tick servers. What makes this situation even more frustrating is the inconsistency in Valve's reasoning. On one hand, they claim that most players wouldn't notice the difference between 64-tick and 128-tick, arguing that only the highest level players truly benefit from the upgrade. But on the other hand, they've pushed CS2 as a massive technical improvement over CSGO, with upgraded visuals, physics, and an overall more modern engine. If hardware limitations were really a concern, why overhaul the graphics in a way that demands more from GPUs, while refusing to upgrade the server infrastructure? It just doesn't add up. And then there's the competitive aspect. Counter-Strike has always been a game where precision matters. The difference between landing a headshot and missing entirely can come down to milliseconds. In a game where reaction time and mechanical skill are everything, why wouldn't Valve want to offer the best possible experience for players? Other games like Valorant have already implemented 128 tick servers as the standard, proving that it's not an impossible task. Yet Valve continues to insist that subtick is the superior solution, despite the overwhelming feedback saying otherwise. Some players argue that the real issue isn't just the lack of 128 tick, but the way Valve has handled the rollout of CS2 as a whole. The transition from CSGO to CS2 wasn't exactly smooth, with missing features, broken mechanics, and a game that felt rushed rather than refined. The subtick system is just one of many examples where Valve promised innovation, but delivered something that felt half-baked. And unlike other developers who might quickly pivot based on player feedback, Valve has remained frustratingly silent, leaving the community to either adapt or abandon ship. For those who have stuck around, the experience has been mixed at best. While some players have gotten used to the new system, many still report feeling like something is off. Watching demos, for example, often reveals inconsistencies in how shots and movements are registered, leading to frustrating moments where what a player sees in-game doesn't align with what the server actually processes. And in a competitive game, that kind of uncertainty can be the difference between winning and losing. With gaming companies going absolutely off the rails, looking at you, Ubisoft, with Shadows and Dragon Age Veilguard, it's a miracle Valve is still one of the few pure game developers left. Every company should take notes. But when it comes to tick servers, they just don't want to listen to their audience. This might be a bit of a stretch, but hear me out. Maybe the real reason some players are struggling with subtick isn't because of the servers themselves, but because the margin of error in inputs has shrunk. It's a concept that's been seen in fighting games for years. Different games handle different inputs in different ways, but generally speaking, the game logs every button press and tries to match them to pre-programmed moves. The cleaner and more precise your inputs are, the better. But sometimes the game ignores small mistakes or even carries over an input from one move to the next. That's why keeping a steady 60 FPS is crucial in those games. If the frame rate fluctuates or there's an input lag, it can actually change the order in which actions get registered. Now, apply that to CS2. Imagine you're peeking mid on Dust 2 with an AK. You're coming from CT, so you hold D to strafe out, let go, tap A to stop, and then left click to shoot. In simple terms, the sequence looks like this: D to A to left click. Now let's say you did all of that insanely fast. So fast that it happened within a single tick. Unlikely? Maybe. But considering your mouse is constantly moving, each tick is already processing multiple inputs at once. In the old system, if everything landed in the same tick, it didn't really matter if the sequence was D to A to left click or D to left click to A. As long as all the inputs were packed into that tick, the game just considered the end result. This essentially gave you a little bit of leeway. Your movement was considered 0, your accuracy was at 100%, and life was good. Even in 128 tick servers, the same concept applied, just with a slightly tighter window. But with subtick, things get weird. Now, everything has a timestamp, meaning the game isn't just processing inputs in a lump sum, it's tracking exactly when each action happens. So, if you hit D to left click to A, instead of D to A to left click, the game knows and treats them differently. That little margin of error that used to work in your favour, gone. In CSGO, as long as you were fully stopped within that tick, your shot was accurate. In CS2, the game knows precisely when you stopped. For you, that delay is barely noticeable. For the game, it's the difference between a clean shot and a whiff. And if you've been relying on that tiny bit of wiggle room, suddenly being forced into frame-perfect inputs can make the game feel sluggish and unresponsive. And don't forget, mouse movement counts as an input too. If your crosshair shifts by just 3 pixels in the same tick that you fire, CSGO might still register that as a headshot. In CS2, that's a miss. Then, there's the whole issue of lag. In the old system, packet loss or network hiccups only affected you per tick. Now, with subtick tracking exact input order, a bad connection can actually scramble your inputs. Before, lag might just mean delayed actions. Now, it could mean your movement and shooting happen in the wrong order, completely throwing off your aim. This is all just speculation, and if it does have an effect, it's probably pretty minor. But considering how different CS2 feels compared to CSGO, I wouldn't be surprised if this was part of the reason. The reality is that many players have already moved on. At the end of the day, the demand for 128 tick servers isn't just about numbers, it's about trust. Players wanted a game that felt as good as, if not better than, CSGO. Instead, they got a system that was supposed to be an upgrade, but often feels like a downgrade. Valve may believe that they know what's best for their game, but the disconnect between them and the community has never been more apparent. Until they acknowledge that, Counter-Strike 2 will continue to be a game that feels like it missed the mark, no matter how many technical justifications they throw our way. The question now is whether Valve will ever listen, or if they're content to let one of the greatest competitive shooters of all time become a shadow of what it could have been.